Welcome, everyone. I'm Danielle Patterson, CEO of Family Office Access, and today's session brings us into a conversation every family usually faces: succession, stewardship, and how to prepare the next generation to carry both responsibility and purpose. Today, we're joined by two remarkable practitioners who have spent decades helping families navigate this very process, from restructuring family enterprise to designing governance systems and fostering the personal growth of family leaders. Together, we'll explore where families are getting it right, where they're still struggling, and what practical tools can help make the transition smoother. For those joining us live today, please feel free to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And we hold these live so we can engage you in the conversation. Feel free to drop your questions and we'll do our best to incorporate them into our conversation and get to them at the end as well. So with that, I will start by introducing our speakers. I'll start with our first guest, Josh Kanter, founder of leafplanner and president of his family's single family office. Josh started his career in corporate law, everything from M&A to venture capital and commercial lending, and then shifted in 2001 when he stepped out of legal practice to reorganize his family's enterprise as his father's health declined. In the last 23 years, Josh has led governance, communication, tax and estate strategy, investment structuring, and multi-generational education within his family. What I admire most is that he didn't stop with his own family. He took what worked and what didn't, and he turned it into tools for other families. That work has led to the creation of leafplanner, a platform modeled after his own family owner's manual, and a structured system for identifying blind spots, organizing information, and preparing the next generation to lead. Many here will remember Josh from his masterclass that he prepared for our community last year, and it remains one of my favorite and most referenced sessions. Thank you, Josh, and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
My pleasure. Next, I would love to welcome Jane Flanagan, founder of Essential Connections Network. Jane has spent her career studying how family leaders grow. Over 30 years with Northern Trust and Family Office Exchange, she has interviewed hundreds of families and executives to understand what actually strengthens transitions across generations. Jane now coaches family office executives, runs peer communities, and serves on the board of Southwestern Family Office Forum. She works directly to support the human side of community, which is where she sees many families struggle. And I'm very grateful, Josh, to introducing me to Jane's work, and very grateful to both of you for sharing your time and your wisdom with our audience today. So welcome. I know those introductions barely skimmed the surface of your expertise and your experience. So I thought, why not let those amazing journeys unfold in today's conversation. So Josh, I'll start with you. I really enjoyed last year getting to interview you in our masterclass series. And one thing that really resonated, having recently lost my mother to cancer, was, that your story began with something so personal, the passing of your father, and really what that responsibility brought. And I'd love to just hear from you how that experience shaped your view of succession and really ultimately, I guess, has led to all the work that you're doing now.
Well, thanks. And thanks again, Danielle, for putting this together. Thank you for having me. Thank you for including Jane. Jane, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
For those of you listening, Jane has been a close friend, colleague, and mentor of mine for many years. There are very few people I have as much respect for as I have for Jane. So Jane, thank you for
Thank you. Thank you both. It's a joy to be here.
I don't want to take our full hour telling my story, but I'll take a minute and try to give you the abbreviated version, because I appreciate, Danielle, you recognizing the personal nature of it. And I love sharing it because it really does, I hope, humanize that this is the work we do in families of wealth and with rising gen family members and stewardship and all the things that you alluded to it's a very humanistic kind of practice, right? It's not just about the balance sheet in the traditional sense or the general ledger. My story starts with my dad, as you indicated, who, as I was growing up, had been a world-renowned tax lawyer. I'm going to skip most of this story, but in any event, he ended up at a fairly young age, 70, getting cancer. We found out he had cancer and was going to die. This was in 2000. And at the time, we had what I didn't really fully understand was a tremendous amount of complexity surrounding our family. We were 3 generations of the family, 3 branches of the family, all tied together through various structures and investments and everything else, kind of in a traditional sort of family office context. And we were filing 750 tax returns a year for our family alone. We were embroiled in what would turn into a 33-year fight with the Internal Revenue Service that went to the US Supreme Court. We had a complicated balance sheet, and we had, I would say, a modicum of family dynamics. We actually, as Jane knows, my family gets along tremendously well. We were just joking off stage earlier about 15 of my family members all being together for Thanksgiving. So we get along really well, but it doesn't matter how well you get along. There's always going to be family dynamics issues. So I left my career when we found out my dad was sick and came to join my family and help navigate through what I would describe as not just the traditional loss of the patriarch, but also all of this complexity that was surrounding our family. I spent 18 months with my dad before he passed away. Obviously, he had cancer. Not every day was a good day, but I would say that was 18 valuable months, both a gift emotionally and then as well,
Yes,
of course, to get that time with him. And I like to say, within minutes of his death, I'm sure it was days, not minutes, but within minutes of his death, I quickly realized I'm a lawyer. I took his estate planning class in law school. I had 18 months with him before he passed away. I think I was about as prepared, and Jane, I'm sure I'll talk about this in the succession, kind of discussion. I thought I was as prepared as one gets for this kind of succession, and quickly realized as people ask me questions, I know nothing. And if I know nothing, that means other people don't know anything. And so that really started to shape my view of how the industry kind of looks at succession and stewardship and preparation. And we'll get into all that. So I won't totally dive into that right now, but that led to the work that you alluded to of my working with other families, and certainly to the development of leafplanner that I'm sure we'll touch on at some point as well.
Oh, well, thank you. And actually, I'll have a member of our team drop the masterclass link in the chat, because it was, just to hear the full-fledged story and what you had to go through. And I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but oh yeah, it deeply resonates. And I'm very glad you had that 18 months with your dad. And it's never enough.
I'm sorry about your mom.
But yes, no, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm grateful to you for introducing me to Jane's work. And Jane, it's just a pleasure to have you here. And I can't wait to learn collectively today from your wisdom. And just before today's session, I kind of reread those amazing 2 research projects you did during your time at Northern Trust. And I understand, you had to interview hundreds of families. And, throughout your career, you've advised family office leaders worldwide. Can you just share a little bit about, maybe what led you into this experience, also the actual experience of working with families in this way, and maybe patterns you've seen in how families are approaching succession?
I'd love to. And I remember, Josh, this time in your life. And the one thing I'll say about Josh is everyone on this call probably knows, anyone who's listened to the masterclass, is everything he's learned along the way, he's been very generous in sharing. And I think, what I've learned about both succession and then engaging the rising gen, which to me are like peas and carrots, right? When there's transition in the family, the first issue is, how do we navigate this change and communicate effectively with all stakeholders to ensure that everybody, change is hard, right? That everybody is as informed as possible. And then the next question is, okay, who's next? And are they ready? Yeah. And if not, how do we prepare them? So what led to the research was at Northern Trust, when I first arrived, I did some benchmarking just to understand where those families served by Northern were in their evolution. And I heard from this group of just under 100 families, thirds of them were in the midst of succession, either in their family enterprise, in their family office leadership, in their family business with trustees and trusted advisors. So that's everybody. It was either in it or getting ready for it in the next 3 to 5 years. Yeah. So it's something that shows up in just about every conversation I have with families, is either we're in it and we need some help, or we know it's coming but haven't had that conversation yet. So the research is really just designed to help families start to have those conversations and understand how other families have navigated those changes.
Yeah. Amazing. I mean, it from so many facets, and that's what I try to explain to people, this world of family offices. I mean, you have the actual enterprise in many cases still operating, and then you have the family members, but many times the family members aren't as involved, and so you have the advisors and maybe the outsourced. So there's so many dynamics, and I'm sure both of you can agree it's never quite the same in any one
Right.
particular situation. It's completely customizable. Well,
Absolutely.
what a wealth of experience we have between the two of you, and it's probably hard to ever fit everything into just one masterclass, but I would love to just kind of dive into really what you guys see working when it comes to the most common obstacles families encounter when planning for whether it's leadership or even ownership transitions.
Jane, I'll let you kick that off.
Well, I think the biggest obstacle really is fear, right? Change is hard. When a leader who's been in a role for a long time, so much of that leader's identity is wrapped up in either the family business, the family office, whatever. So it's helping people get comfortable with the fact that yes, it is a little bit scary.
Yes.
But not talking about it is not a strategy, right?
No.
And then you have the rising gen, when you talk with them about, future family leaders, what do they want most? Transparency, which also freaks parents out, but they don't need to know everything. They need enough information to be able to feel a sense of agency and to make good decisions for themselves. So I think helping people is just, framing this. What's interesting is succession is a normal, healthy part
Yes.
of everybody's life, right?
Yes.
It doesn't take the scariness away from it. But I think talking about it, baseline, getting some understanding of, and learning from others who've been there before. And I know Josh with Leaf Planner can actually be a great mechanism for training, right? Getting everyone informed. I think it's the best gift any patriarch or matriarch can give their children is just that information, the information they're going to need.
Yeah, maybe Josh, this would be a great opportunity because I mean, change is the only constant, right? It's the only the only constant we have in life. And it's true. The fear, sometimes we don't want to experience change. I like structure, I like order, but we need change to grow, to take those next steps. It's necessary. So to help people, it's almost like we need some sort of strategy, some sort of structure or technology, which Josh, I think that's kind of the own evolution. You went down and pretty much created that solution for your family. Can you tell us a little bit maybe about
Sure.
how it all began?
Sure. And I think, I would add to, I totally agree with Jane's framing of this, that so much of this is about fear and it's about transparency. And then when you get to the transparency side, to me, part of the other real problem, which I think I'll define it as an obstacle since that's the way you asked the question, is that people grossly underestimate their complexity. And so when you talk about transparency, I have families that I talk to all the time. I'm sure Jane does. Danielle, I'm sure you do as well, who are like, oh, we're very simple.
Yeah.
And if you start really pressing people on, oh, I have a second home, I have a couple cars, I have a couple insurance policies, I have a couple of trusts, I collect a couple of things, anyway, start magnifying this, and you realize how many things are in your head, and that it's not only about mom and dad dying or going away or transitioning, that it's really about how many different components there are in this ecosystem, because people typically, this is not just about uber wealthy families, this is really everybody, but people don't think about the housekeeper knows something, and the dog walker knows something, and the property manager knows something, and you don't plan for the 80-year-old lawyer who's going to retire and say, I'm out of here.
Yes.
let alone and we had, for example, a 53-year independent trustee who passed away a couple years ago.
Oh, wow.
You can imagine how many things this guy touched going back to the 1970s, probably 1960s. And I had to figure that out. So, which is then the answer to your question. So thank you for asking about Leaf Planner. Really, the origin story for this goes back to my father's death, and again, realizing how little I knew. And to some extent, I would say how little I knew was less about, again, the traditional, of course I knew where the balance sheet was. Of course I knew where the trust documents were. Didn't mean I understood them all.
Right.
But at least I knew where they were.
Right.
But what I really realized was that the context around these things, the contextual nature of all this stuff matters so much. And that's, I would argue, what we don't really think about that often in the context of succession. And what that meant for me was there were people who came out of the woodwork saying, oh, your dad promised me this, your dad promised me that. My dad, I mean, I'm sure hopefully most of our listeners are young enough that they think about contacts and Outlook contacts and Gmail contacts and Apple contacts. But my dad had thousands of people in the round Rolodexes that sat on his desk.
Yeah.
I didn't know, other than some famous names, I didn't know who they were. I didn't know who he trusted. I didn't know who to turn to. So you have that kind of thing. I did a deal with Jane because Jane and I have known each other for a long time, but now maybe I don't trust Jane as much as I do trust you, Jane, implicitly.
Thank you. Yeah, I trust you too.
It was all of this kind of, again, contextual nature of this stuff. And so when we sat down and said, there's got to be a better way, I was well positioned as a lawyer. I had taken my dad's estate planning class. I think I always joke there's a generation skipping gene in addition to a generation skipping tax, because I didn't understand the stuff at all. But, I had the education, I had the experience to step into this, but my artist sister did not. Even my venture capital brother did not. My commercial real estate wife did not. My mother, God knows, did not. So how do you translate these things into what the SEC would call plain English? How do you add them and again, kind of educate people about how this all comes together? So that for us became the family owner's manual 25 years ago. And it was an old joke on, I'm sure everybody remembers the old adage, you get an owner's manual with a toaster and not with a kid. And we said, well, guess what? You don't get one with a family of wealth either. And how you operate this family. And to your comment earlier, Danielle, I always say to families, you've got to separate the family business from the business of the family. And those are two different business lines, and you have to think of them differently. So this was an owner's manual around the business of the family. Oh, wow. And that became Leaf Planner 4 years ago. We said, I would love to, I mean, this is going to sound very whatever, but I love helping other families. And Jane, thank you for sharing that. But
it's the truth.
For me, it was really how do we help as many families as possible? And that was by turning this concept into a repeatable process that anybody could follow. It's not about the number of zeros. It's not about the number of commas, right? It's really about, do you recognize you've got complexity and succession is important? And that means not just succession of the person, but succession of the information and the knowledge.
Yes.
And that became Leaf Planner.
Amazing. I'm very visual. I have to have like an organized world, but my organization, it looks like chaos to someone else. So that's one of the things I appreciate most about Leaf Planner. It's just like documenting, making transparent and visual, and really just this web of what can be chaotic unless it is archived somewhere. And then two, the fact that everyone can have access to that. And I'd be curious because, Jane, you've worked across generations, and in terms of trying to communicate effectively, I'd love your insights on, what methods you see and how it's different between generations in terms of being able to clearly communicate. And that's where I do feel that the technology, especially what you've built, Josh, is very important, just in terms of making things transparent, available, clear, organized.
Well, and I think that's a great question. And in interviewing several future family leaders, so think ages 25 to 40, about what they want, need, and how they wish to communicate with the family office. I think what's interesting is if you think not that long ago, when we would do surveys and asked families, how do you communicate with family members? The most common response was, quarterly financial statements printed on paper sent through the US mail.
Oh my
Now,
goodness.
when
Yeah.
I ask, I mean, it wasn't that long ago where that was
Sure.
the most common response.
Sure.
Now it's, if you need a signature, text me. If you need me to sign something in DocuSign, text me to tell me to open my email to sign the DocuSign. So it's really become this multimedia endeavor. And I think one of the lessons learned from this that we can all take away is I think our instinct, right? I feel like some days I email for a living. It's my age and who I'm communicating with. But I think one piece of advice for everybody is when you sit down to communicate, think about the recipient of that information and how they prefer to receive information. So grandma and grandpa might want a phone call.
Yeah.
Or you might drop by if they're in the neighborhood, knock on the door, whereas your 20 something is like, please don't call me, send a text.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, in terms of communicating and sharing information, it's dripping on members of the younger generation in ways, 2-minute videos.
Digestible. Yes.
Yeah, like a podcast instead of a book. So just thinking about who your audience when you're and the nature of what you're trying to get in response really dictates which medium you use. So that is a big change, and I think it's one that we'll continue to see evolve. I'm curious to see, I don't think you can Snapchat stuff yet, but but what's the next?
What will 5 years from now? What new technology? Exactly. We're all talking into our watches or projecting, who knows? It is crazy to think in such a small window how much has changed. And then the speed of development right now, just to try to even imagine where we'll be in just a few years. So.
Well, and just the idea of everything on your phone, like, right, we don't carry everything in our pockets. And, and again, Leaf Planner gives you that information at your fingertips, which is another thing that this rising gen is really interested in. They've grown up in this 24/7 access world. So looking for ways to give them that is really important.
Yeah, I think I'd love to add to that for 1 second if I can. I think that it's so interesting because yes, there certainly are these generational divides. But obviously all of us are getting used to new technologies as well and using them in different ways. And it's been fascinating to me, and that I've said to families, for example, oh, have you done a letter wishes to your kids? And I've had an 80-year-old turn to me and say, well, I'm not going to sit down and write at a computer, but I'll open my iPhone and do a video to them, right? And so
it's even better.
Again, just kind of recognizing the different mediums available and how you might want to use it. And to Jane's point, I think not only how does the person want to receive it? We all have different learning styles and visual learners and reading learners and oral learners and all these other different things, right? But what also are you trying to convey? And I thought it was so interesting. I was talking to a number of, I've got a number of colleagues, as does Jane, who do various kind of biography work or family history work. And some of them are videographers, obviously, or documentarians, and some of them are books and, more of the older school, I guess I would say, printed material. And I was really fascinated. I was talking to a colleague of mine, and I said, why? And he happens to be a book publisher of these kind of family histories. And I said, well, why in this day and age would somebody do a book instead of a film? And his comment, it just blew me away. I was like, I never would have thought of this. And he said, well, if you see a film and you see 80-year-old grandpa telling a story about World War II, you see 80-year-old grandpa. If you read the word off the page, you're back in 20-year-old grandpa. And that's what you're visualizing. And so, I mean, it was that kind of thing where, again, like the use of the different media is just so important to both the learning style, what you're conveying, how you want to convey it, all these things. So it's really
I love that. And I like that you're kind of in the work that you do with each family. I'm sure it's very valuable to then share those lessons with other families, which is what both of you do, because you almost need the inspiration, the framework to inspire and encourage, like, well, you can do it this way if this doesn't feel comfortable. But I think there's probably a lot of blind spots. You probably just simply don't think of things until it's maybe too late. Do either of you want to touch about some of the blind spots you see in the work that you do?
I would, we've alluded to this, but the one thing I see is just not only underestimating complexity, as Josh mentioned earlier, but underestimating the time that these transitions take, especially in a family. You know, generational transitions, you know, easily 10 plus years. So the message is it's never too soon to start. If you're the leader who's getting ready or thinking about your next chapter, it's never too soon to start dreaming that next dream and then thinking about how do we execute on this. So I think that just that it takes longer. It's like home remodeling. You know, it takes longer, costs twice as much. So you can't start too soon.
Yeah. So is there an age, you know, a recommended, or is it very different for each situation? And how, you know, when you're saying it's never too soon, like what are some simple ways that you can really start to engage that the younger or just the family, even if it's a business transition?
I don't know, Josh, is it your turn?
Sure, I'll jump in there. I mean, so first of all, I think the way we think of, or I think about blind spots, it's a very broad, you know, blind spots to me can be things that you knew you should do, but you didn't do it. You know, a simple example of that is always the lawyers told me to put my house in a rev trust to avoid probate, and I didn't do it.
Yes.
And if you happen to be in California, that's a big deal.
It is.
There could be blind spots of, oh, I never would have thought of that. What are the family dynamics issues when I take my legacy ski house and put it in a dynasty trust for my kids or the cousins? But nobody's ever talked about those family dynamics issues. And as Jane's saying, certainly when it comes specifically to succession, the amount of time involved and the amount of information that you're really trying to transfer. And now I completely forgot what the question was. I'm so sorry.
No, just talking about, you know, blind spots in general, and with this succession in preparation, is there too young of an age to start?
Yeah.
What are some of the ways, you know, you can start to kind of lay the foundation, I guess, to bring the younger generation in?
Yeah, I think I talk to when I talk to families about this, and obviously I focus on this in our own family as well. And our next gen, if you will, runs currently from 20 years old to 40 years old. But obviously I've been doing this now for 25 years. So that was 5 years before my youngest was born. And obviously my oldest nephew, who's now 40, would have been 15 years old. So, you know, I think, yes, to you alluded to is this unique essentially, or a very personal decision to every family? Of course, the answer to that is yes. You know, different kids are ready for different things at different times. You've got to be sensitive to when it comes to transparency, even if I don't personally really have a lot of fear of it, but that's my own personal bias, right? Around demotivating kids and things like that, right? The industry has been very fear-based and fear-driven, and I think that's a really unfortunate way of looking at this. And but I do think, yes, that's a very personal decision when it comes to transparency or what you're educating people about. But I think, you know, again, to Jane's point, I don't even think it has to be through the lens of succession. It's really the lens of education and stewardship and just knowledge and just becoming a responsible human. Right. So, I mean, I've been out on hikes with my kids where all of a sudden, I mean, this is going to sound terrible, but like, how does an insurance trust work has come up? Not exactly fun hiking conversation, but it's so great that that's the foundation that we've tried to lay, is to be able to have, you know, conversations over long periods of time, so that people understand these things when they come up, rather than all of a sudden, you know, I hope this doesn't actually really happen, but when people are dragged into the lawyer's office for the reveal or the will reading or the here's your trust, or, you know, with no knowledge of who the people are and no relationship with them and all these things. So I think the biggest blind spot, you know, really what you guys both have talked about is this failing to actually think about preparation and putting it in that context. Again, it's another fear element. We're fearful of dying. Nobody wants to talk about death, right? Nobody wants to talk about being put out to pasture.
No.
So thinking about it more from how do I educate rather than how do I just plan for my own demise? It's maybe.
Well, and if I could add just one thing
Please.
in thinking about the young people I interviewed.
Yeah.
And when I'm sitting with parents who are maybe cautious and afraid, and it's been a black box, and where do we begin and how much do we share? That most common
Yeah.
question is, what is the right age? And I
Yes.
wish there were. There's no answer.
Depends.
As Josh
Yeah.
said, every child is different. But the one thing I just want people to remember is all of this starts at home, and
Yeah.
it's daunting as parents. How you behave
Yes.
is what you're modeling for them. And when I asked these future leaders about their first memory
Mm-hmm.
of like understanding that their family had significant wealth, what age was that, and what were those memories relative to when they started to learn,
Yeah.
and in any practical way about how to do that. It was all grade school. It was kindergarten stories. It was
Wow.
third
Yeah.
grade stories. So these kids
At home.
are
Yeah.
smart. They know it. So in a way, you're starting to have these on a hike conversations or in the car,
Yeah.
bite-sized, age-appropriate conversations is just such a great way to build their comfort and confidence and just trust around, and a safe, it helps them feel safe in
Mhm.
learning. Like you're setting the stage for, of course you don't know this, it's not taught in school, so let's talk
Right.
about it.
Yes.
Right? Because I think there's, these kids when they're in their 20s, if this finance isn't their jam and they're not in business school, this whole thing can be really intimidating. So starting early, age appropriate, bite size, just sets the stage
Mhm.
for long-term, health.
Absolutely. And I was
And
going
I think
to
also, by the way, it's so important, Jane, you said earlier, I don't remember, you said it differently than I'm about to say it, but not having a plan is a plan, right?
Well,
And
that's
Right.
not an
yeah,
effective strategy.
it's
Like
not
that's
an
not a
effective strategy.
strategy.
Exactly. That was it. Right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I think the other place that comes up for me all the time, I feel like is saying to people especially people who want to be more opaque with their children or their spouse or anybody else.
Yeah.
And it used to be, and I'm gonna bring this forward. It used to be that I would say to people, look, your kids know how to use Zillow. They know, whether you're sitting in first class, God forbid, they know whether you're sitting on a private plane. They know how to use Google, right? And if you haven't Googled yourself, by all means, go Google yourself, because you need to know what your kids at a very young age can quite easily find out on the internet now that everybody's walking around. Now, throw AI into that. And if you haven't done it, please go do this. Like I've done this for me. I've done it for my wife. I've done it for my dad. And my dad is interesting because most of his life is pre-internet.
Yeah.
So it was harder. But if you haven't gone and asked pick your favorite chatbot. I don't care if it's ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or whatever it is, right? Go ask a question like, please tell me about the life and times of Josh Kanter. And oh my God.
Really? Well, now I'd like to compare all the different tools and see. That'd be even more fun.
But it goes to this idea of when is too young.
Yeah.
You got to be conscious of how young our kids are now that can access all of this information or misinformation, if you will, because it's not necessarily going to be accurate. And so if you want, it's back to if you don't have a strategy, if you having no strategy is a strategy, right? Because your kids will do this.
Well, and what I'm hearing from both of you is just, how important that communication, and whether it's formal and structured, just talking with them. And that's, we talk about my business and often they hear us, but it's important that they don't just hear you, but that you're engaging them at, whatever age, and having those safe, trusted conversations. Because you're right. I mean, they're going to learn and pick up on these things. So if you can become a trusted, safe place to have these discussions, and that they feel they can always come to, but also be involved. I think it is sad to me that traditional school doesn't teach you these basics that all of us really need to know. And so many of us find ourselves in these situations. We didn't have the the law background you did, Josh. I mean, your family's so lucky to have had you. And I think a lot of your father's modeling, I know you always looked up to him. And was he a big inspiration in your deciding to go into law?
A little bit. I came out of college with degrees in economics and political science and decided I was qualified to say, do you want fries with that? And so it was law school or business school, but I ended up but yes, he was certainly an influence. And there's nothing that it never really happened in quite the way I thought it might, or at least the same path that I expected. But yes, I mean, there was nothing that would have made me happier than working with my dad.
Amazing. Well, and I know with many families, they have their own dynamics, but then they have to trust advisors and bring people in. And what are some of the complexities that you see in bringing outsiders into the family? And talk to any maybe ways that we can cut down on friction in that process.
I guess I would start with saying a couple different things, I guess. One is, finding advisors, obviously, who you like and relate to, who are qualified, because there's so many, especially as families grow their wealth. There are so many people who, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but, I'm using my fraternity brother as a lawyer who is not an estate planner, but I'm going to have him put my will together, all these kinds of things where people are grossly over their skis in terms of their capabilities. Their values, frankly, matter a lot. Whether that's choosing your estate lawyer who's going to be drafting your estate documents, or your trustees, or your executors, or God forbid, your guardians, right? As you've got younger kids, and making sure that their values match up, and their willingness to be collaborative is, especially as your wealth grows and your ecosystem gets, I'll say, more and more complex. Then, what I think so many areas of the wealth industry, if you will, have always been very siloed, and it's very difficult to find people who are really, really collaborative. It's very much, to me, about checking the ego at the door and saying everybody has good ideas. And that, by the way, can be, again, I pick on my family all the time. My sister, I mentioned, is an artist, and she, I'll jokingly say about Janice, she speaks in a language that many of us often don't understand. She'll make up words, but she's again an artist. She sat on a number of museum boards and did lots of other things, and really taught herself, I'm not sure intentionally, but really taught herself about a lot of different things, in particularly in the investment and finance arenas. And she's now, and has been for at least a decade, a member of our investment committee. And again, while I jokingly will say she'll speak in a completely different language than my venture capital brother and me as a lawyer, she brings such valuable insight and discussion to our investment committee because she's gone out and educated herself. And so to eliminate her because she's an artist and say that disparagingly is such a mistake that it's really great to me to make sure that you're using all of the human capital at the table.
I love that. And then no one feels excluded or hurt. And it's, a family is so dynamic. We were talking off stage as well. So I hosted my whole family from California. I have 4 siblings. We're 4 years apart. I mean, you're like, how did we all come from? We look like we came from the same 2 parents. But now, my dad, since losing my mom, has his new girlfriend. And I was like, I don't think you could have gotten any more different personalities under one roof. But it's about celebrating that. We're family, and finding the way that works together, and how those, opposites actually work stronger together. And so I can imagine too, you mentioned the values of the family. So probably one of the most important things is, sure, we can all be different, and maybe we even have different values, but like how those intersect and how an outsider can come and fit into that very delicate balance. I'm sure, Jane, with the work you do, you probably have a lot to add here as well.
Well, I think, the one thing, I was just speaking with someone this morning, and I said, in the context of this question of engaging the rising gen, preparing the rising gen, I said, don't forget about your advisor ecosystem. They all have people on their teams who can help you who are good educators, who can
Yeah.
check the jargon at the door and create a safe space, who would be happy to come to a family meeting and talk about their experience with other families.
Yes.
So I think sometimes, as Josh said, provided you're surrounded by the right, you've got the right people on the team, tap into that.
Yes.
Like you don't have to do this alone.
True.
And for advisors who are listening, it's just, again, like one of the themes that came through in this research was just the importance of psychological safety. So we all speak a language different than Janice's, which is great, but just checking that jargon at the door, setting the stage when you're in a meeting, that there are no silly questions. This is a safe space, and really demonstrating that in the room, just so that people feel comfortable raising their hand or asking a question. I just think that's really important, and advisors can be just an incredible resource for the family and that family learning.
I love that, and just finding the superpower of each. And I love, Josh, that in your family, that Janice has her unique place and her unique skills and how those complement everything. And this is an interesting observation that I have just from looking at the members of our community. There's obviously a lot of collaboration that goes on within each family, but there's so much collaboration, and I'm encouraged by this, amongst other families, whether it's sharing in diligence or best practices. And, there's now these conferences or amazing groups. And I know, Jane, you were with Fox, and Josh, I've asked you about different communities you've been a part of. Maybe you guys can speak to some of the collaboration and the benefit that you see from those various communities you've been a part of.
It's my favorite thing. Honestly, my favorite thing about this family office space is how generous everyone is. Josh is one of the most generous I've ever met.
Yes.
But I can pick up the phone and reach out to anyone who I may not have talked to in a while and say, hey, Steve, I remember you did this a couple of years ago. Would you talk to Sue, the stranger in another state? The answer is always yes. So I think that there's, family offices are so private. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody's got this, and it can be lonely work. But at the same time, there is this generosity and just willingness to say, hey, and I think you'll find that at Fox and Forge and, a number of communities where there are discussion boards and networks you can be a part of. There's just such fabulous give and take.
That's amazing. Yeah. And this is something too, Josh, I know I caught you right as you were returning from one of your family, I guess it was like a retreat or a meeting. And I know, Jane, you also spoke about the importance of having these things and making them fun and not just, too work and structured. I'd love just advice either of you have on the right cadence, the right setting, how to make those run successfully, I guess. And it's hard to generalize because every family's so different, but maybe even share stories. You don't have to name names, but of family planning meetings that have really worked well and what's encompassed with those.
Yeah, I hesitate to go first because again, I almost want to attribute everything I know and have learned to Jane and Jane's colleague who took me under their wing when I came into the space. But I think that there's a lot of simple things that I actually do think are pretty generic and can be applied across the board. I mean, you just alluded to obviously making these be hopefully some level of fun, right? If you're going to do a full weekend, make sure I always tell families, please start with dinner the night before so that you can remember that we're family and you can laugh and you can tell stories and you can recognize that people came in from work and they came in from dropping the kids off and they came in from all of the hassles that, whatever. So sort of not de-energize. I don't know what taking that, de-stressing the situation. Taking the power dynamic. Jane kind of alluded to this a minute ago, right? Taking the power dynamic away. Don't do this in dad's boardroom. Don't, do this at a hotel. Do it at if you're really comfortable with it and it's not a power dynamic, do it at the family vacation home, whatever it is that you're going to do. Get out of the power dynamic. Bring in a facilitator. I can't emphasize enough how hard it is. And I'm guilty of the opposite side of this because I've done this for my family. for many, many years. But the difficulty of taking off your family hat and putting on a facilitation hat, or changing those roles and responsibilities, is really, really difficult. I'm working with a family that we decided, it's just mom and dad and a couple of kids, but we decided to create a family council of the four of them to help administer how these trusts were going to operate. And for the first few meetings of the family council, it was exactly what you would expect to happen. It was still mom and dad and the two kids sitting at the table trying to have this conversation. And so we added somebody to the family. We added another person, an independent person, and that changed the conversation. It changed the dynamic.
I'm sure, yeah.
Be aware of people's, as Jane was alluding to earlier, really important. Be aware of people's learning styles. Be aware of people's needs. Be aware of how people are being heard. You often see in families, there's somebody who needs an extra 15 minutes to process what's being said, but by then everybody else has moved on to the next topic.
Right, they're like,
and they never got to express their opinion, right? So again, that's where a talented facilitator will see that and make sure that everybody is getting their chance to be heard and to participate in the process. So there's a lot of things I would say that are actually very kind of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
That are kind of generic across to help make this successful. And then another big one I would say, and then I'll shut up, is really recognizing that, there's this old, I wish I had a psychology background sometimes, but there's this thing where people talk about, you basically recognize your kids and your siblings essentially as who they were the last time you lived with them. And so your kids go off to college, that's how you've memorized who they are, or your siblings and whatever. And yet they're constantly, of course, evolving and growing new human capital, intellectual capital, and whatever. And so being open to understanding who's at the table, again, it's my sister, right? I mean, she's a fantastic partner. And I have to be open to seeing that. So
meeting them where they're at. And that's, my grandfather died just a month short of 106. But the thing that I admired most about him is just his open mind and his open heart. He wanted to always, like, what have you learned? What's new? He'd want to hear about business. And like, I love my dad, but like more so than my own father, who's, half his age. And so that always stuck with me, is just how to meet people where they're at, to really like listen. And that can be hard to do. So I think investing not just the time and the energy to make these things happen, but also the resource to have the proper facilitation. Because that is, we have so many hidden biases that I'm sure surface when unintentionally, when you're just trying to communicate. And again, the family versus the enterprise, and knowing where those boundaries sit. Jane, do you have anything to add to the family?
I would just, Josh did you both did a great job. I think co-creation, so making sure if you have a, G1, 2, and 3, or G4, 5, and 6, representation from each of those generations in the planning process. So I've seen one example of a family where they actually use this as a way to engage the rising gen. Their G5s planned the annual retreat.
Oh, cool.
They gave them a budget. They gave them so they found the space, and ended up organizing a surprise birthday party for the 85-year-old patriarch. But their mission was really to create an agenda that accomplished the business stuff, right? You have to do the business stuff, but also they found a way to have something of interest for each generation. So that co-creation, especially when you're trying to get rising gen participation and engagement, it feels better when they have a voice in what's being talked about. And then I always do a public service announcement for white space on the agenda. I think sometimes we feel so much pressure. We only have everybody for this period of time. We need to do this, this, and this. It should feel a little bit uncomfortable. The amount of fun you have built into that agenda should make somebody uncomfortable, usually the senior family members. But that is the heart of all of this, is the relationships. you're building, maintaining, you want those cousins to know each
Yeah.
other. You want them to have shared experiences that they're bringing to the board table when they're making decisions. And sometimes that happens on a bus on the way to a field trip or at cocktail hour or at the pool. So those are my two things: co-creation and white space or fun, just as an important part of the agenda.
I think those are brilliant suggestions because, again, it's only as successful as you can get everyone's participation and buy-in. And so by giving that leadership, that ownership, we mentioned my family. I've got the 4 siblings. We're all 4 years apart. It can be hardest sometimes to get my youngest, and she feels like I always plan because I like to be organized. And so this was actually a lesson. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Richard Wolkowitz and xylogenesis, but in his masterclass, he talked a lot about how he likes to make people change roles and change positions so that they have that empathy and they understand. And so I practiced that. I said, you know what, I'm not going to organize. I know you all think I love to do it, but like, let's give that role, let's pass the baton. And it was amazing how just that shift kind of opened up empathy for the others, but also empowerment to those who aren't normally in that position. So I love that role for the younger generation. Also, it's only successful if you have buy-in. So it's got to be fun. And fun may look different to different people. So yeah.
Right. Everybody's definition of fun, right? You're trying, and that's a tough job, but I think just the intentionality, being intentional about that, you're going to be better off than if you hadn't talked about it or tried it all. And it's trial, all this stuff. Nobody has all of this figured out, right? So it's always just try it. You don't have to do it next time if everyone hates it, but you've at least tried something different, and you're listening, always listening to what worked, what didn't, and what's next.
Well, I have more questions for you all, but I do see there's a question from the chat, so I'll pull this in. It's, what is a good question one should ask oneself to get unstuck regarding resistance to doing this great work? Thank you.
Well, I guess it's what happens if you what happens if you do nothing, right? Like, just play that out. So if you can, that's a choice, right? It's just like not talking about it is not a strategy. It is a choice. And that's one of your options. But I think just playing out that, what if we do nothing? What does this look like for your kids, your grandkids, and that may inspire you to try something. And all you have to do is try, right? I don't know, Josh, what do you think?
I was actually going to say exactly the same thing. So the only thing I can come up with that would be different to that, I would add the parallel question of, what do you think is stopping you? What's the fear? Because something is in the way, and you've got to identify that fear. And I feel like you can almost promise that it's fear-based.
Yes.
And so how do you eliminate that?
Well, and this is going to get us deep for a minute, but I think ultimately it's our outlook on secession and the end of life. And there's just this terrible fear and stigma. And one friend recommended a book, which I recommend to everyone. It's called Being Mortal. Atul Gawande, I believe, is the author, but it's just beautiful. And it talks about how we view getting elderly in this society and how we view death, where it's like, it is the one given again, but we can either choose not to discuss or think about it, or we can have open discussion. We can accept that this is going to happen, and then we can plan. And that book was such a gift to me when I needed it most. And so I recommend it to everyone. And I wish, I'm like, these are the things that they don't teach in school, but there really needs to be more on some of these areas of life that we know we're all going to go through. So are there any books or tools or resources that you could recommend for people dealing with these challenges, wanting to find better solutions?
I have there's a whole list in the back of both of these, the succession research and the engaging the rising gen. I think when it comes to succession, helping that departing leader start to dream the next chapter, right? You don't want to, you're not just leaving, you're going. Like when I interviewed all these former family office CEOs, not one of them used the word retirement. It was my next chapter, my next. So I think sometimes, and there are some good books in the back. One is, I'm not going to remember the name of it right now, but it's just resources to help, because letting go
Yes.
is the hardest part
Yes.
for everybody. Even when you're ready,
Yes.
you know, it's still, you're like, wow, this is hard. I just spoke with some a business owner recently, and she said, I keep having these oopses.
Mhm.
You know, like someone came to me and said, are we doing the Christmas party? And she said, yes, we are. And she said, oops, not my decision anymore. You know what I mean? Oops.
You
So
these
it's
habits.
also just, yeah, it's, you've been doing this for 30 or 40 years, and now you're welcoming someone new. So I think it's patience with that process.
Yes.
But hopefully we can link those. I know there are books in the back of both of those
Yes,
papers.
I see
that can help.
Madison from our team dropped your 2 studies, the
Okay,
PDFs,
good.
and that the one about the CEO succession really struck me. My husband, you know, served his company got acquired by a PE firm, and he served 3 years as the CEO. Watched this amazing culture he built as an entrepreneur shift, but
Change,
when
yeah.
he stepped down, he was elated. He was happy. He was ready for, he called it his chapter 3. But what he didn't anticipate was just all those relationships, the shift in identity. I mean, it's been a full year, and he's like, I mean, it took him at least 6 months to not wake up with the adrenaline of like, I'm going to fight wars at work. And so, I mean, it was just, I found that part of your work very fascinating, just all the unintended emotional part that comes with it, because that is it. It's your identity. You dedicate so much of your time and self to these roles, but how I feel the family office model, and this is where Ron Diamond will agree, they really do, you know, it's different, and I think that they can make that a gentler transition, a more thoughtful one.
The resources in Jane's papers
Yes.
are phenomenal, and I would highly recommend people go check those out. Obviously, there's a whole host of books. Jane and I both have, you know, giant reading lists for people if they're interested in sort of the broader topic of family enterprise and multi-generational families and that kind of thing. 2 things that I would say, I like to find things that push me to think about them in somewhat different ways. And so for many, many years, people would say, you know, what's your favorite book? And I'm not sure it's really my favorite book, but I kept coming back to this book called Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. And for people who remember Ken Follett, he was like a kind of a World War II mystery-ish kind of writer. And then he did this, it's not really nonfiction, but kind of story called Pillars of the Earth that was about building cathedrals in the Middle Ages.
I remember. Yep.
And it's phenomenally beautiful. And now that I do all this family work, I keep thinking about, like, here are these people who are building these cathedrals over centuries who would never see the finished product. And so when you want to start to think about succession and what is the product that you're building in this family enterprise over generations that you will never see, it's like, it's a really beautiful way, I think, to think about it. And then the other one that I would say people, especially for the business people kind of in the audience, who I'm sure are all Simon Sinek fans and follow what Simon writes and everything else. So one of his books is called The Infinite Game, which is all about how you think about finite games, like a football game that it's got 60, you know, whatever minutes, and it's going to end, and you're going to win, you're going to lose. And the infinite game, and if you read that book really carefully, but now through a family lens, because it's clearly a business book, but if you read it through a family lens, and I don't know, I'd love to meet him and ask him if he ever thought about this. The lines are so important, because it's about how great leaders set up the enterprise to succeed past their lifetime. And there's just reference after reference that if you put that in the family context, it's just so interesting so it's not about what's happening to me, it's about how am I using that to set up for the future. So awesome read for people who are interested.
I'm excited. Both of those recommendations sound beautiful. And I kind of, I heard Jane touch on this earlier, but just the ego of the leader and how, you almost have to be altruistic. And I feel that maybe those are the signs of the most successful leaders for these families with great longevity. Well, I cannot believe we're already at the top of the hour. I feel like I could just go on and on with the 2 of you. And I prepare a script and I never really stick to it. So thank you for just flowing with the questions and sharing your amazing expertise. I I can just see how wonderfully you both have influenced each other, your generosity, just to the community, but to us today. Thank you so much. And for all of you joining us live, we just appreciate you being here, bringing great questions. We hope you'll continue to join these sessions. For anyone interested in exploring what Family Office Access is all about, the community, the data, you can head over to familyofficeaccess.com. We have a free trial, so you can get in, explore our platform, but also as a gift for being here and being a member of today's session, there's a live 20% off coupon code through the end of the month. And that is it. We appreciate everyone's time. It's our greatest asset. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.